Welcome. This is Studio 2. I'm Cherry Gregg.
And I'm Avi Wolfman Aaron. Welcome, folks. Welcome on YouTube. Welcome on 90.9 FM. Today, Cherry, pretty basic show.
Yeah.
We're talking about the last 24 hours in Washington, D.C. New president inaugurated. New president does a whole bunch of things. Couldn't even list them all right here in the intro. Our question for you today, what is your reaction to President Trump's speech yesterday and his first actions? Give us a call, 888-477-9499. You can also email studio2@whyy.org or leave a comment on our YouTube stream. Brosafan, that's our girl Shirley, says, appalling. Why in the world is he doing this? So you can leave comments right there in the YouTube stream. We'll read them in during the show. We have a pair of commentators and experts coming in for our second and third segments today.
Yeah, and I spent the most of the day watching. It was King Day. Shout out to Martin Luther King Jr. That was the federal holiday. But, you know, a lot of folks boycotted the inauguration day festivities. And so they're probably like reading about what happened yesterday, today. And so when you're finding out about it, what do you think? What's your reaction? If you didn't watch it, even if you did, we want to hear from you. And so we have our trio of news stories.
1, 2, 3. Start us off.
So in case you haven't stepped outside, it is cold. I don't know about you, but it's cold. We had
Imagine the person who didn't know that.
I know.
They just haven't been outside.
They haven't paid attention. They've been in the house, warm and toasty, near a heater or a fireplace. But yeah, we hit single-digit temperatures this morning. We'll see it again tomorrow as well. And we'll get down to around 8 degrees. But with the wind chill, it feels a lot colder. Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, all part of 35 states that are right now under cold weather advisories. We had 3 to 6 inches of snow, depending upon where you were over the weekend. And it's the biggest snowfall of the season. And that tends to make it feel even colder when you have, you know, the snow on the ground and all of that. So salt trucks have been de-icing the roads, and we salted our sidewalks because, you know, in Philadelphia, you have to keep things clear within 6 hours of a snowfall. So you have to get out there, you have to shovel, you have to do all the work, and or you could get in trouble if someone slips and falls, right? Yeah. You could be possibly liable. And so, you know, but people have some issues with salt because it can be sort of bad for the environment.
Sure.
And so the team at Drexel, right, has developed technology over the past several years. And they have developed
They did something at
Drexel.
Is it new salt?
It's not salt.
It's not salt.
It's concrete.
Whoa.
Yeah,
You're blowing my mind,
That
man.
would be self-warming to help melt the ice, so you don't have to disrupt the environment with salt or with brine or all those things.
I wish I was self-warming. It would help a lot.
I think you are.
Really?
Yeah, we're warm creatures and all those things, so we're self-warming. But that is part of the technology.
It's biology 101. Okay.
I have to say, I had personally never heard of this technology from Drexel University, but you know, it's good. I mean, this is what they've been talking about. I think we had a story about this on WHYY last year.
Yeah, Zoe Reed.
Yeah.
Told us about this last year. I think it comes up every year when it's cold. This initiative at Drexel. People see their sidewalks and they think, why do I have to salt and shovel this?
Exactly.
Apparently it'd be pretty expensive, though, because you have to lay all new concrete sidewalks and roads. They say it would pay off in the long term because, you know, salt does cause road deterioration, as does freezing temperature. But, you know, high upfront cost feels like a long shot. But maybe someday, self-warming sidewalks. It's a specific substance they mix in there. It's liquid paraffin, I believe.
There it is. And by the way, right now, though, people are going to use salt. They could also use some alternatives that are more friendly to our environment.
Such as?
Pickle juice.
Pickle juice?
Yeah, potato juice. Beet juice.
I don't even know what that is.
Beet juice. You can also put some coffee grinds down.
Potato juice.
Yeah, apparently these also help to melt the snow. And I do like the coffee grinds one because, I mean, that allows you to reuse some of the things you have.
You got them anyways.
Yeah.
From cold to hot now.
Yeah.
Philadelphia's housing market, one of the hottest in the country, according to Zillow. You know Zillow. They
From
list
cold to hot. By the way, can I just point out. That was a good transition.
Thank you. So Zillow, it's the website with all the house listings. They predict that Philadelphia, among the 50 largest markets, is going to be the 5th most competitive in 2025. They had a whole analysis. The Inquirer did a nice write-up based on the analysis by Zillow.
They did.
But the long and short of it is that there's not a lot of housing supply in Philadelphia. And when demand outstrips supply, you have a competitive market. And that seems to be where we're headed in Philadelphia. The typical Philadelphia home on the market for just 21 days compared to 37 nationally. So that's not great. If you're looking for a home. If you're trying to sell a home, great news. Your home is worth a lot. If you're trying to buy a home, you're trying to crack into the market, as many young people are trying to do, not good news.
Not good news. And there's a lot of reasons for this. It's because baby boomers, we talked about this, they're not leaving the market as previous older generations did. And millennials are buying at later ages because of this lack of, opportunity to buy homes. By the way, one of the things that I did see as a silver lining here is that people, this means we live in a very affordable place when compared to other places, which is why people are looking at this market and they want to move here. But, now we have this low housing supply, which makes it very hard. But people don't want to leave because where are you going to go? Interest rates are high.
They could build new homes.
They could. And hopefully they will do that.
Yeah, it's really hard to build homes in the suburbs. There was some good reporting. This was a few months back, maybe a year ago from the Inquirer. There's very little new housing, especially in the suburbs. Yeah. Even in Philly, it goes up and down. But you just don't build. If you don't build a lot, it's going to be tough for the market to change. It's going to be kind of locked up. My wife's a real estate agent, so I think about this stuff a lot. And end of the day, it's pretty basic. Supply and demand, supply and demand.
Hopefully there will be more supply.
I hope the Eagles will supply
a win.
Some more great moments as they have all season long. And let's move to our third story now.
Yeah, well, this story caught
this is the most
my
important story, really.
In the Philadelphia Inquirer today. They ran a story about a man by the name of David Bergner who collects Eagles memorabilia, and he posts a video every day of the season wearing a different jersey and hat, and he never repeats. And he has about 137 different combinations of basically Eagle swag.
Of jersey hats. So
jersey
it's always
hats,
a different combo.
Always different and counting. And he's been doing this for more than 30 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Every single day.
Every single day during the season.
Yeah.
Yes, he does this.
Season.
Yeah. And he has over 300 jerseys and 200 hats. And I like this story because I wanted to talk about the Eagles.
Sure.
They won this weekend, 28-22 over the Los Angeles Rams, and it was snowing, which looked really cool on the field.
It did look cool.
But it means that now they're going to go to the NFC Championship, and they're going to play I grew up in Washington, D.C. area. So did you, Avi.
Yep.
And I wondered, I'm going to be split now because I grew up in a household that is a football household.
Sure.
And they love the Washington football team, and we know their prior name, right?
Yeah.
And so we love the Commanders at home. But Philadelphia.
Well, who's we?
My family.
Okay.
The Greggs. Okay.
just
the Greggs love the Commanders. And there's my dad right there wearing his special Super Bowl champions jacket with the Washington team logo and helmet on the back for the 3 Super Bowls that they won over the years.
Rubbing that in, okay.
And so in order to honor my dad, it's like I gotta, on one hand, I'm torn because, there's the Commanders, but Philadelphia is my chosen city. So they're the Eagles on the other side. But I wondered if you are split in the same way because you are also from the Washington, D.C. area.
Grew up there.
And then you told me today you are not split at all.
I'm looking the camera on this one. I am not split at all. 0%.
And I saw that picture. There's a picture of Avi looking very Avi, but
That's
like
me.
Young.
That's me at age 11 wearing the paraphernalia of the only football team that anyone should root for, the Philadelphia Eagles. Yes, I grew up in the DMV.
But
as did you. But my dad's from here. My grandpa's from here. My great-grandpa was a city employee of the city of Philadelphia. So my roots are here. And I was raised to be an Eagles fan. Thanks, my mom, by the way, for the picture. That's me and my sister. And in fact, not only am I not split about this, there is no team I dislike more than the Washington football team. I grew up in enemy territory, surrounded by those people, and I cannot wait for them to be crushed and their dreams to be extinguished on Sunday in Philadelphia.
I don't even know.
And that's the final word on that. I'm sorry, Mr. Greg. The
Daddy,
run ends
Reverend.
on Sunday. We'll be right back on Studio 2.
Supporting WHYY, Rachel Riley, a real estate agent with Elthont Wissahickon Realtors. She's committed to being an advisor to her clients on building wealth, stability, and happiness through buying and selling homes. RachelRileyRealEstate.com.
Is writing your will on your to-do list this year? WHYY is here to help. We're hosting a free virtual question and answer session on the basics of preparing an estate plan, featuring expert attorneys specializing in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware estate law. Join me, Shirley Min, on Tuesday, February 18th at 3 p.m. To register, visit whyy.org/events or call 215-351-2000. Thanks, and I look forward to seeing you.
Supporting WHYY, Signify Business Cash by Wells Fargo. With this business credit card, cardholders can earn rewards on business purchases with no caps or categories to track. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/signify. Terms apply.
In today's information overload, finding a trusted local news source matters.
With a dedicated team of more than 60 journalists, WHYY News goes beyond the headlines to verify every fact and tell the stories that matter to our community.
From politics and climate change to education and culture,
City Council is weighing legislation.
we deliver reliable news to the Delaware Valley.
Listen live to 90.9 FM or stream anytime on the WHYY Listen app.
On the next Fresh Air, Jesse Eisenberg joins us to talk about writing, directing, and starring in the film A Real Pain. He and Kieran Culkin play cousins on a Jewish heritage tour in Poland, which includes a stop at the Majdanek death camp. We'll talk about how the story relates to Eisenberg's life. Join us.
This afternoon at 3 and again tonight at 7 on WHYY.
And welcome back into Studio 2. I'm Avi Wolfman-Arent.
And I'm Cherry Gregg. President Donald Trump has been in office for one day. In his inaugural address, he made numerous promises about his immediate executive actions, and many of them will undo Biden-era policies.
An emergency declaration at the southern border, tariffs, a freeze on federal hiring, reversal of several climate policies, as Cherry just alluded to, and clemency for people convicted in the January 6th insurrection. The list is long, and we have two guests joining us this hour to break it all down. Fresh from Washington, D.C. is Terry Tracy. He is the CEO and an author at the media outlet Broad and Liberty. Terry, welcome back to Studio 2.
Thank you for having me.
We also have Dick Pohlman, a longtime national political columnist and writer of the newsletter Subject to Change at Substack.com. He also teaches political journalism as the University of Pennsylvania's writer in residence. Dick, welcome to Studio 2.
Thanks for having me.
And to all of you listening and watching, our question for you today: what is your reaction to President Trump's first actions? Give us a call, 888-477-9499. Email studio2@whyy.org, or you can leave a comment on the Studio 2 YouTube stream.
And so Trump had promised to make Americans head spin with his agenda. He made a lot of statements during his inauguration speech, and then hours later, he started signing those executive orders. Tracy, you were there in Washington. What are some of the things that stood out to you for the day, and then specifically those executive actions?
I was telling Dick before we started one of the things that struck me before we get into the substance of what President Trump did was just how tight security was in the city. I was in Milwaukee for the convention, and they sort of had tiers of security that you had to go through in order to get to where the main event was being held. But once you were there, you could sort of enjoy the experience and hear what speakers had to say. The security in Washington this weekend was unlike anything I've ever seen before. It was very difficult to get around. Most of the city was shut down because of the move indoors. People who were there to attend things didn't necessarily see the things they intended to see. So the experience overall was a little disjointed for the average person going and wanting to be a part of what happened this past weekend. But that notwithstanding, I think when you think about what happened from a substantive standpoint, it was a very, very different inauguration for Trump 2.0 than it was in 2016.
How so?
Yeah.
I thought the tone and tenor of the speech yesterday was substantially different than 2016. I know that there's been a lot of shorthand comparisons to the American carnage remarks in 2016, which for critics of that particular speech, I would agree with. Despite conservatives or Trump supporters feeling like the Obama era left a lot of problems on his desk, I think those problems pale in comparison to the problems the country faces today. And so when he was talking about sort of the need for a new golden era, a great revival, even using the term Liberation Day, I think it seemed more apropos this time than it did the first time. And then his pivot to a much more, I think, unifying message, and even just the way he was delivering the message to me, he was more somber, he was more focused, he struck me as a different man this time than in 2016, and we'll see how that bears out in the days to come. But certainly it was a flurry of activity and lots to talk about based on all of the actions they took. His team was ready and prepared to hit the ground running on day one.
Dick Pullman, do you agree? Different tenor, different seeming individual, or did it feel like Trump 2016 all over again in terms of his tone? And we'll get into policy in a second.
Right. Well, I think we're better. They're definitely, I agree, he was better prepared than he was when he came in on Inauguration Day 2017. I mean, I don't even know if they necessarily expected they were going to win that first election. And so, this time, a lot of the preparation and the think tank people that have been working on stuff for a couple of years. So I wasn't surprised to see that they were hitting the ground running the way they did with those executive actions. But at the risk of having maybe perhaps half your listeners disagree with what I'm about to say, I noted that today is the 75th anniversary of the death of George Orwell. Mm-hmm. And I think George Orwell might have heard something yesterday that maybe perhaps other people didn't. For instance, he said he was going to, of course, when he took the oath, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. And then one of the executive actions he took is designed to undercut or eliminate birthright citizenship, which is in the Constitution of the United States, 14th Amendment, which has been backed by a congressional statute and 2 Supreme Court decisions. And so I think for me anyway, and I think for a number of Americans, perhaps the 75 million who voted against him, I think the jury is out on whether the tone we heard yesterday is going to be about unification, is going to be backed up by his actions. I think there were a number of things he did yesterday which I think are going to be heavily questioned by many Americans. For example, pardoning 1,500 people who were involved in the January 6th insurrection. I remember when Michael Beschloss, who's the presidential historian, said something a few years ago, and I'm going to quote it now. He said, "Can an American president plot against our democracy, even to the point of violence, as on January 6th, and not suffer serious legal or other consequences?" Well, he hasn't suffered those consequences. And I think pardoning people who directly attacked the peaceful transfer of power and a free and fair election that Trump lost, pardoning those people, I don't think necessarily goes to the goal of unification.
Yeah. I want to, Charlene writes, when she talks about the pardons for January 6th, she says, please explain how a president could take an oath to the Constitution, which supports the rule of law, and then pardon 1,500 convicted felons who attacked our Capitol. And we have Tom Dreisbach, who's an NPR investigative reporter, who posted on X today that January 6th rioter Adam Christian Johnson, who pleaded guilty to storming the Capitol, he actually posed with Congresswoman Pelosi's lectern. He posted a photo with him and Senator Fetterman today. And that was something that people looked at and they're like, oh my goodness, someone who did this thing is now posing with senators. And so Terry Tracy, I apologize, I called you Tracy earlier, Terry, but your thoughts, when we talk about these pardons, and I think it was over 100 people from Pennsylvania and New Jersey who were pardoned and included in that, your thoughts on the impact of that being a day one action by President Trump when he knew that there were many Americans who disagreed with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the pardon debate is tricky here because of certainly what happened in the final days of the Biden administration. And so what's going to happen is partisans on both sides are going to say, well, this president undermined the rule of law or took, extra or unconstitutional actions by doing X, Y, and Z. And we can certainly have a debate about all of that, right? There was actually a local example of someone that President Biden pardoned on the one of the last days in office. He was, I heard a local retired FBI agent interviewed about it recently, and this is a man who assassinated a couple of young federal agents in cold blood in South Philadelphia. It was a mafia-related case. And the FBI had gone, Christopher Wray had written a letter to President Biden and said, this is not somebody that ought to be pardoned, and ultimately he was pardoned. And unfortunately, there are way too many examples of that. And then there are all the questions around the Biden family pardons at the last minute, which preemptive pardons, which doesn't sit well with a lot of people and raises a lot of constitutional questions. So I think that obviously the January 6th commutations and pardons are going to be a source of a lot of debate. And I think that that's reasonable debate. But I think there's a lot that we don't know about what happened on that day, and there's a lot that we can talk about at a high level whether this should or should not happen, but there are individual cases, individual actors, individual circumstances for each of these 1,500 people. I think the reality is that the jury, the most important jury, was the American electorate, and President Trump won in pretty convincing fashion in November. And I don't think that this isn't something that's a surprise for people who supported him or voted for him. I think that they knew some version of this was coming because of the way he handled the January 6th question on the campaign trail. So I think that the best way to handle this would be, if we had all the time in the world, to go through and say what's legitimate and what's not legitimate. And I don't think we should. I think it's dangerous to paint a broad brush.
But what was illegitimate? I mean, we saw the video, we watched it happen. I mean, I think a lot of people are wondering, like, where is there's gray area here? I mean, there was supposed to be a peaceful transfer of power. These people stormed into the U.S. Capitol, beat on police officers. Like, what is the gray area here?
I'm going to depart with you there because I don't know that all 1,500 people did what you said they did, and I don't think any of us.
But it was sweeping though, because the action was sweeping. It wasn't individualized.
Well, that's the point that I just made. I said I think if we had all the time in the world, you could go through each name and say, I don't know, was this case legitimate or this case not legitimate? Did they do this to that? But I think he is making a broader political point here by saying that the way this was handled, and what he was saying yesterday. Listen, I wasn't there, but what he was saying yesterday was, I tried to prevent this. There were concerns this was going to happen. I spoke with Speaker Pelosi. We offered additional troops or National Guard. I was turned down. There's lots of false flags. I just think that there's a lot of information out there that we don't know. I think the fact that evidence has been allegedly destroyed, there's all kinds of information out there that raises a lot of questions about how these things were handled. And in the executive order, let me just make this last point. In the executive order itself, where he pardoned these folks, the point that he made was that the federal government did not deal with the rioters in the 2020, 2021, the folks that were burning down the cities in any way the same way. And the broader political point or policy point that I think that the Trump administration is trying to make is that there is a weaponization of these agencies, and that there is
so they did something wrong. There is not something wrong in response.
There is not a balanced use of the power of government here, and that he's leveling the playing field. I think that's the argument that the Trump administration is making.
And I want to bring in a caller, Eugenia from Cinnaminson, New Jersey. She has a comment. Eugenia, you're on Studio 2.
Good afternoon. I find it curious that no one is asking why. Why does Trump do these things? What is the end game? Did he pardon 1,500 people to start an army for? It seems as though he doesn't want to give up his ruling of the United States or sideline the world. I feel as though in 4 years he will not relinquish the presidency and that he is building an army.
Thank you so much, Eugenia. And if you want to chime in today, you can share your reaction to President Trump's first executive actions. Our number is 888-477-9499. The email is studio2@whyy.org. And so, Dick, I want to ask you this question as a tie on to what Terry said. I mean, you have someone coming into office who's the first action that they take is these broad sweeping pardons, no differentiation. And you mentioned, Terry, that President Biden on his way out issued some pardons. But what message does it send when you're willing to boldly make such broad sweeping pardons on you aren't even in office but a few hours? What message does it send to the American people?
Well,
Your thoughts,
the message I think it sends is that you can beat up on police officers on federal property at the U.S. Capitol, and it's okay as long as you're supporters of President Trump. I mean, to me, it's a baldly partisan message that he's sending. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, polls show that most people, most Americans have problems with pardoning people from January 6th, because we saw, I think this was something that was just mentioned a few minutes ago, we saw with our own eyes and ears what happened. And, are we supposed to deny what we saw with our own eyes and ears? So I think it's a powerful message, a powerfully disturbing message, which basically says, if we lose an election, that it's okay to storm the U.S. Capitol and protest it. And I don't know if I would necessarily buy the notion that there's still a lot of information out there that we don't know about that would happen on January 6th. I think it's unfortunate, and I wrote about this last week, I think it's unfortunate that most people have not bothered, maybe perhaps because they're just exhausted, to look at what Jack Smith wrote in the special counsel report that was released about what happened on January 6th, where he said basically, and I'm paraphrasing, but I'm pretty close to what he said, is that they had more than enough sufficient evidence to convict convict Trump if that ever went to trial. So I can't ignore that. And I can't ignore the fact that, and I couple this with the political message that you've just asked me about, is that this is the first time that voters have willingly elected a convicted felon to the presidency. That to me is something I just can't get around that. Now, whether it was convincing or not as a victory, you could argue that it's convincing in the fact that, yes, he won the popular vote and he won the Electoral College and he got more votes in 2024 for what he's proposing to do than he did votes he got in 2020, and certainly more than in 2016. But if you actually take a look at popular vote margins of all the elections, it's actually one of the lowest of all the margins. Now, he's claiming a mandate anyway for his 49.9% popular vote. He's claiming a mandate anyway, as we would expect him to do. I think what people who aspire to exercise power the way he's aspiring to do are going to basically say there's a mandate, even if there is, questions as to how much of a mandate there is.
Sure. Ellen on YouTube says people are appalled at Biden pardoning people. Trump's actions are next level. It's upsetting. So I guess let's put that on the back burner for now. Everything about the pardons. Terry Tracy, when you look at all of the executive orders, all of the initial actions, which of them feels to you like it's going to have the biggest reverberation, the biggest impact?
I think that the immigration stuff is going to be the one that's most responsive to what I think is one of the issues that resonated most with the electorate in this election. But I'm not sure. I mean, to me, we're just getting back to basics in terms of making sure that our borders are secure. This is sort of 101 stuff the government ought to be doing. I don't think there's anything particularly revolutionary when you read the executive orders themselves about what he's trying to do. It's either restoring policies that he enacted in his first term, or more broadly speaking, are just doing things the federal government should do, which is have orderly, legal, efficient immigration at all of our borders, northern, southern, what have you. I think the other thing that's problematic, again, broadly speaking, about this executive order debate is how much governing is getting done through executive order, regardless who's in there. Congress needs to get back to regular order. I think this is something we've discussed when I've been on the show with you guys before. Congress needs to do its job. Congress needs to reassert its authority and clean this up, because right now way too much activity happens in the executive branch and the courts, and Congress can barely pass a continuing resolution to keep a budget going. Congress needs to reassert its authority that it is granted to by the Constitution. Constitutional scholars argue with this, but many agree that the Congress is the primary branch of government. And I think if Congress gets back to regular order, it would mitigate a lot of this stuff about executive orders in this administration or that administration, because they'd just be getting things done the way they're supposed to through legislation.
As it stands now, these executive orders do matter, as you point out, because it's often the way things get done. And so when you say that the stuff on immigration doesn't strike you as particularly revolutionary, is there anything in there that does strike you as an important departure, an important signal, something that's like, hey, let's focus on this because this really tells us where we're headed?
To me, it's the stuff on the Department of Government Efficiency. So they did a freeze on the federal workforce yesterday. And I know there was a lawsuit by the ACLU sort of questioning the transparency issues related to DOJ, but I think the Trump administration is going to take action in order to legitimize that as a governmental agency. Vivek Ramaswamy is leaving to run for governor of Ohio, we understand. It's going to be fully run by Elon Musk and whatever team he appoints. And I think it's going to be fascinating to watch that here. I think
some of that stuff probably feels in the weeds to people. Why do you think it's so important?
Because there has not been a concerted effort to reduce the size of government in the federal government in a generation. And it's really, really hard to do. Once you create a new bureaucracy, it comes with constituencies and fundings. It's very hard to unravel. They take on a life of their own. Sure. And so any concerted effort to reduce the federal bureaucracy's footprint and the impact it has on people's lives and the ability of bureaucrats to legislate, sort of ignore Congress and legislate from within their agencies, could have, if it's effective, could have a profound impact on federalism in the nation going forward.
By the way, and Dick, I want to bring you into this part of the conversation, because some of the things that the president did was to freeze hiring within the federal government, to order all federal workers back to the office 5 days a week, which may send some people packing, to also, run some reports and look at what the federal government actually does, and your thoughts on some of the actions that were taken to sort of really evaluate the efficacy of the federal government and all the departments.
Right. I don't know if this is going to necessarily answer your question, though, but there were just two areas in terms of the executive actions that struck me. And one of them does involve federal muscle, which is the promise of mass deportations. And I'm not clear exactly, I don't think anybody is just now, how that would work in terms of actual implementation. It's going to cost an enormous amount of money. Where's that money coming from? Where are people, if there's going to be mass deportation, where are these people going to be housed? Are we could be building new stuff for them?
And let's just play a clip from yesterday where President Trump spoke about immigration, saying he would declare a national emergency at the southern border. Take a listen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All illegal entry will immediately be halted, and we will begin the process of returning millions and millions of criminal aliens back to the places from which they came. We will reinstate my Remain in Mexico policy. I will end the practice of catch and release, and I will send troops to the southern border to repel the disastrous invasion of our country.
And that sort of sets the scene, Dick, for what you're talking about with this beefing up a federal muscle when it comes to the border. Your thoughts?
Well, I mean, the questions I have, I mean, are if we start deporting millions and millions, quote unquote, of people, who are going to fill, there's a lot of support jobs that a lot of Native Americans don't want to do. And I don't know, everything from gardeners and maids to, I mean, you can go on and the list is endless. Who's gonna pick the crops? Who's gonna do construction? There's a lot of states where undocumented immigrants help to build housing, build offices. There's going to be a huge reconstruction effort in Los Angeles County after the wildfires, and there's been a lot of people who are saying that there's a lot of undocumented immigrants who work on those projects, and I don't think a lot of employers necessarily want to give them up. So to me, the devil's in the details, and I don't think we've gotten enough details. Nor have we gotten details on. He's saying that he wants to impose 25% tariffs on products from Canada and Mexico. We don't know yet. That
perhaps
a lot
as
of
early as
economists,
February 1st.
Yeah, so economists talk about that. That's going to be very inflationary. He's proposing to cut inflation. So I don't see how those two necessarily work together.
We'll talk about that on the other side of this break. Also want to talk about what the response should be from Democrats, because we have an interesting email on that subject. So right now you're watching or listening to Studio 2. If you want to join the conversation, give us a call, 888-477-9499. Email studio2@whyy.org or leave a comment right there in the YouTube stream. We'll be right back.
Supporting WHYY Foundation Academy's charter school in Trenton. Leveling up is hard work, especially throughout a child's educational journey. Foundation Academies is a thriving community where their educators invest time and care in each scholar's growth and wellness. To support their mission, they've opened additional seats in grades K through 2 and are accepting K through 12 lottery applications through February 21st. FoundationAcademies.org to apply. Foundation Academies. Grow with us.
I'm Scott Tong. America faces a loneliness epidemic, says our Surgeon General. For some, solace can be found at home or at work, but when those places are not enough, where else can we go?
The third place is where we go and socialize. It's the place where we make connections and where we build friendships.
The role of third spaces in tackling loneliness, next time here and now. Weekdays at 1 on WHYY.
Supporting WHYY, Ballet X, presenting its winter series February 12th through 16th at the Suzanne Roberts Theater, featuring world premieres by Kylie Kwan, inspired by timeless music of the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and Gregory Dawson, featuring a live performance by Philadelphia jazz pianist Luke Carlos O'Reilly and band, plus the return of Niccolo Fonte's Steep Drop Euphoric. Tickets and subscriptions at balletx.org. That's balletx.org.
Welcome back to Studio 2. I'm Cherry Gregg.
I'm Avi Wolfman-Arent, and we are talking about President Donald Trump's first 24 hours in office. With us today are Terry Tracy, CEO and author at Broad and Liberty, and Dick Pullman, political columnist and writer of the newsletter Subject to Change.
And I want us to continue where we left off before the break. But before we do that, let me just invite you at home and you listening and watching online on YouTube to join the conversation. Our question for today is, what's your reaction to President Trump's first executive actions? Our number is 888-477-9499. The email is studio2@whyy.org. And if you're on YouTube, you can leave your comment or question in the chat.
Tease this before the break. I want to read this email from Hibbard, who says, I just feel like all of this is designed to troll Democrats and get us all worked up. I don't want to give it any credence, but at the same time, I don't want to just stick my head in the sand either. I think it's never been more important to pay attention and do the work of calling out anti-American, inhumane policies, but at the same time, find balance with self-care for myself, my family, and my community. That is a broad topic, but I'll direct it to you, Dick. Politically, What should Democrats be doing in this moment? Because it does feel a little bit like the cat chasing the flashlight, and it pops over here and there, and you just sort of run after everything, and then you kind of do nothing. I mean, your response.
Right. Well. I mean, just on a personal note, I had a political column for 20 years that was just like, was almost all Trump and Democrats all the time. And I basically gave it up in December and started this new thing, which is going to have a little bit less focus on politics. The reason being that I needed, as I think many people need, to step back a little bit, some kind of self-care, and not being obsessed with this 24/7. Because it's not healthy at this point. By the same token, you can't not pay attention, because people of Trump's bent, and a lot of the people around him, they would love it if people just basically gave up and didn't pay attention. So you have to engage. And so Democrats right now are completely demoralized, I think, and can't figure out what to do. And
if you look at these executive orders, this big sweep of things, I think it is a question of priorities. Like, what hill would you die on, basically, and what do you say? Look, this sounds a little nutty to me, but just sort of let it go. I mean, can you? How do you sort through that? Are there things that you're like, Democrats absolutely need to hold the line on this?
Well, I think we mentioned right before the break, I was talking about the 25% tariffs.
Yeah.
I think that's one area that they can focus on, because we're talking about, Trump promising to bring prices down. After the election, he said, it's not going to be that easy, after he'd been saying it through the campaign. The tariffs have a potential of, because the countries pass it on to the American consumer. And so this is, kind of like a grassroots, granular area. If we're talking about helping and reconnecting with working Americans, then this is something I think that Democrats can talk about. Certainly in Congress, there's still enough of them there. They have a strong contingent in the House. It's only a very small Republican majority. I think they have to be able to talk directly again to kitchen table Americans about are Trump's policies going to be doing the opposite of what he's promising, and here's what we would do. So I think on the economics are really, really important. I would probably start with that if I were them, not that they've asked.
Yeah, I want to read a couple comments that we've gotten. We asked people to tell us their reaction to the first executive actions by President Trump. And Kathia Eustace says, I agree with everything. Aaliyah says the entire thing was a ranting mess on the first speech and first executive actions. Janet says, my 9-year-old called Inauguration Day the National Day of Crying. And I asked him if he told his teacher this, and he said, no, I can't discuss politics with my teacher. So those are just some of the comments and the reactions we're getting from our listeners. I want to bring in a caller. We have Susan from Mount Airy. Susan, you're on Studio 2. What's your question or comment?
Hi, everybody. Great show. My statement is very short and not at all sweet. The guy thinks he's running a company. That's what he thinks. I spent my whole life professionally in the corporate world. He thinks he's running a company. He's never even read the Constitution, I would bet. That's all.
All right. One reaction from Susan from Mount Airy.
Yeah, so I mean, but I feel like Terry Tracy, you hear that, and that's music to your ears, right? Someone who's got more of that mindset and is not as maybe hemmed in by the traditional politics. I mean, first, maybe I shouldn't assume. What is your reaction to Susan's comment?
I think there's truth in it, but I think that the majority of Americans find it refreshing because the country has not been particularly well run the last 4 years. And that I think a point that he made yesterday that I thought was very effective was some very basic things that we're not doing well, like responding to natural disasters and protecting our borders and putting the interest of working Americans first, that leads to this message that I think is going to resonate, which is this restoration of common sense. And while certainly folks that don't agree with Trump politically or on his policies are going to have a natural aversion to that, I think the reality is his style has proven to be politically very, very effective. And it goes back to the conversation you guys were just having. I even think the birthright citizenship issue, I think he knows that ultimately that's probably not going to, it is in the Constitution, it's probably not going to withstand the legal test that is required. But in his mind, this is all a negotiation. And so when it comes to the immigration policy that he's looking for, if he can ultimately give that one back, then he's going to get other stuff he wants. And I think the tariff situation is exactly the same thing. And it's balanced out by yesterday's declaration of emergency on energy, where he believes that being able to release the potential of our energy economy will reduce interest rates.
And let's play a clip on that. Trump said he would make good on campaign promises to drill, baby, drill. Here's what he had to say. Do we have that clip? All right. Here it is.
We will be a rich nation again, and it is that liquid gold under our feet that will help to do it. With my actions today, we will end the Green New Deal and we will revoke the electric vehicle mandate, saving our auto industry and keeping my sacred pledge to our great American auto workers.
So there you have it on energy. I mean, I think the broader question I have for you, Terry Tracy, is I have heard this interpretation in the past of what Trump does. He doesn't really mean it. He sort of goes to an extreme to get back to some bargaining position that he had established only in his mind. But at what point do people just start calling the bluff and just say, like, we get it, this is your thing, you kind of govern by chaos, but we're just going to ignore you? Like, do you think there's actually 4 years of shelf life to that strategy of, I'm going to declare blatantly unconstitutional things and then use it as a negotiating chip?
Yeah, I mean, I don't totally agree with the premise, but I get what you're asking. I think that the reality is that time will tell. I think he learned a lot from his first administration, the first 4 years. Certainly some of that he did wear out as welcome, right? And especially with what was going on in the country at this time, it's ultimately why he was not awarded a second term in 2020. But the drill baby drill stuff, the closing the border stuff, the tariffs, the January none of this is a secret. He's been campaigning on it for years. The American electorate knows it. The international community knows it. And it's going to be very interesting to see how the international community in particular responds, although it is also seems to be a very different response now than it was in 2016. And so I don't know. It hasn't worn out. Time will tell if it's effective, but certainly it was effective enough to get him a second term. And that's the politics of it. Now we have to see if it works through the policy piece, which is why I think this DOJ thing is one to watch.
Yeah, and I want to just, because we only have a few minutes left, I want to talk about the issue of gender, which came up in the inaugural speech. It's also something that is part of the litany of executive orders. And in his speech yesterday, Trump specifically took aim at DEI policies and mentioned gender specifically. Take a listen.
This week, I will also end the government policy of trying to socially engineer race and gender into every aspect of public and private life. We will forge a society that is colorblind and merit-based. As of today, it will henceforth be the official policy of the United States government that there are only two genders, male and female.
And I want to talk about the impact of this, Terry Tracy, and also get your reaction to that, Dick, because, identity politics, serious, divisive issue during the campaign. This is a day one policy. He specifically mentions gender. Your thoughts on why this was part of that, and then the reaction that you're going to probably see from the community, because a lot of people feel really afraid about this.
Briefly, on the sex issue, we talked about this the day after the election.
Yeah.
That commercial that they ran against Vice President Harris on the federal funding for prison transgender inmates that became one of the defining issues of this campaign, and was a death knell for the Harris So to me, that's that playing out on the policy realm. I think when you think about the comment that he made about a colorblind, merit-based society, it wasn't lost on me that argument was made also on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, which was a core tenet of Martin Luther King's advocacy. And I think, broadly speaking, the thing that resonated the most for me, that was not necessarily substantive but more rhetorical, which you tend to get in inaugural addresses, is this manifest destiny that everyone talks about, him being an isolationist and everything. Yeah. This idea of American greatness, Hillary Clinton laughed at the Gulf of America. I laughed at the Gulf of America. But when you start to take a step back and think about the way he is positioning the country and wanting people to believe that we can do more and be better, there's an aspirational aspect of this that we did not get from Trump in the first administration. And I think that that could
attribute that. I'm just so curious about that, like the idea of sort of withdrawing from the world in some ways, like the Paris Climate Accords, the WHO, but then also projecting power, especially within your sphere, your hemisphere. Panama, Greenland's kind of not quite on the border there, but you know what I mean?
Changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America.
What is the directional thrust of this, Terry Tracy?
Oversimplification, but I know we're short on time. The common thread through all of this is make America great again. He does not believe that those international organizations that you meant have the nation's best interest in mind, and he believes it is Americans, it is the American government, it is American industry, it is American wherewithal that must be primarily responsible for American greatness and American prosperity. And that's when he's talking about bringing back our sovereignty. Those are the kinds of things he's talking about. And you have to put this in a global context, because when you see what's going on in Canada, when you see what's going on in Europe, these are themes that are much, much bigger and much broader than what's going on in just this country.
If we withdraw inward and pursue a sort of like spherical style imperialism, Dick Pullman, what is the consequence of that moving forward?
Well, I think everything's connected in this world. And I think, we have to work closely with other countries, and pulling out of the Paris climate change agreement, for example, is, I suppose, partly symbolic. But a lot of these things we were talking about, gender and Greenland and all this, a lot of those are like the little things that we're sort of chasing, where we don't pay attention to some of the most fundamental things that we should be paying attention to. Some of the things we haven't even mentioned here, for example, and don't have time to. Like, for example, he wants to go after our public health bureaucracy. And we haven't mentioned things like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. perhaps heading up our public health apparatus. And I'm without being catastrophizing here. I worry about if there's another pandemic, and why wouldn't there be? We had one. If there's another pandemic, bird flu or whatever, is the federal government under Donald Trump going to be adequately responding to that in terms of vaccines and in terms of all the steps that public health officials need to take to protect people's lives? We that's hardly been talked about in the last 24 hours, because there's just so much other stuff to just focus on all the time. And climate change, for example. We had the wildfires I mentioned in L.A., and it's indisputable that climate change and worsening weather is making things like...
But real quick, though, is internationalism dead in terms of trying to address something like that, whether it's health, whether it's climate? I mean, because Terry mentions, like, it's not just the U.S. that seems to be moving in this direction. There seems to be a nationalism afoot in various corners of the globe.
Well, I think it's bad.
But is it happening?
It's happening for now, but I think over time there can be correctives, depending on what happens with him in the next couple years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the next 4 years, I guess that tees us up for some future conversations.
And by the way, I saw that there had been some breaking news. A number of people have filed lawsuits already on the birthright citizenship executive order. We expected that, and that's already come.
Let me thank our guest today, Terry Tracy, CEO and author at Broad and Liberty, Dick Pullman, political columnist and writer of the newsletter Subject to Change on Substack. Studio 2 is produced by Debbie Builder, Paige Murray Bessler, and Andreas Copes. Mike Schiffler is our visual producer. Al Banks and Paul Parmalee engineered today's show. Our executive producer is Kevin McCory from Studio 2. At WHYY in Philadelphia, I'm Avi Wolfman-Arendt.
And I'm Cherry Gregg. Thanks to all of the folks who wrote in today, callers, and people on YouTube. We appreciate you. You can find every episode of our show and bonus content at WHYY.org/Studio 2. You can download and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. and we want to hear from you. Make sure to rate and review the show.
And we are live on YouTube every day. You can head to WHYY's YouTube channel to join the video stream anytime Studio 2 airs, and you can add your questions and comments to the live chat. We'll be back tomorrow. Up next on WHYY, you guessed it, it's Here and Now.